Hi, Dr. Finn. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Jordan. Thank you.
Okay, fantastic. Let me just get the editor all set up. Okay, I think we are good to go. Okay, welcome everybody. In this lecture, we have a really fun project that we're going to build out. We're going to see how we can build out animated components and how we can do things like listen for scroll events and be able to manage how the animations are rendered and also how to create that type of navigation. And so right here, I have the final version of what we're going to build out. So there's a couple ways that you can navigate. So I could use my mouse and I could scroll down and you can see those elements sliding in and out. But the other thing I can do is I can actually click on these little icons here and I can navigate back and forth. So it's almost like I've created a form of pagination based purely on content on the same page. So instead of showing pagination in a series of 10 different rows of a table or something like that, well, what I've actually done is taken a set of components. In this case, I have, I believe, 10 of them, and I'm simply going through, I'm iterating over each one of them, and I'm able to use these little buttons and have click listeners that allow me to move up or down depending on where I'm at. And you'll see that we'll also implement some dynamic behavior, such as when you get down to the very end of the list, you can see that it checks and it doesn't show you another arrow there. And if I come all the way up to the top, you'll see it's the same thing. I don't have an up arrow because there are no other elements above that. So we're going to be combining a number of different libraries in order to make this possible. And you're going to see how you can have all of them work together. So let's switch back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to switch to the starter version of the code. So check out starter. And I'll start running this and we'll see what the beginning version of this looks like. So now if I hit refresh, you'll see that we don't have our little pagination icons there. And but if you start scrolling with your mouse, you'll be able to see that you can go from one element to the other, but we don't have the cool animation when the component shows up in the viewport. And then we also don't have the ability to slide down and automatically and programmatically scroll down to each piece of content. So that's what we're going to be building out. The very first thing we're going to do is we're going to see how we can add in that animation where as soon as the item, as soon as that component is visible, we want to slide it in and then zoom it up. And in order to do that, I'm going to show you the library. It's a combination of two different libraries. One is called animate.css, and the other one is React Animation on Scroll. And so what we're essentially going to be doing is combining both of these. And essentially this library right here is like a wrapper for that, for animate.css. So if you've ever come here or seen different applications that have this type of behavior, then this might be something that you find really exciting because now you'll get to see that it's pretty straightforward to build in this type of behavior. And their website itself is a great way to test things out. So if I click on one of these elements here like flash, you'll see I can create that, or swing, any kinds of animations like that that you may have seen on other applications. Back in down allows you to slide an element down. And so you can just play with these and see exactly which one fits your own use cases. As you'll see, there are uh, quite a bit of them. And one of the really nice things about using this library is if you were to have to build all of this out yourself, this would take a lot of code to write, both on the CSS side and also on the React and JavaScript side. And so by using a library like this, as you'll see, you can implement this type of behavior with just a few lines of code. So let's get started on that. So make sure I have the most recent version of the code. And now if I go into the code editor, I already imported these here. So we simply have to follow along with the documentation and bring these in. So animation on scroll, I am going to wrap up one of these elements. So if you want to take a look at the code, it's pretty basic. I created an array of integers up here of 10 of them, and then I'm simply mapping over them. And with each iteration, I'm returning a div. Now what we're going to do is we're going to change that up a little bit. And instead of returning a div, I'm actually going to wrap up that entire div component with this animation on scroll component and make sure we do the entire div. And then this takes in a few properties. So the very first thing that it takes in is the animate in element. And in the documentation, if you go through it, you'll see it has a very specific kind of syntax. And so you say animate double underscore, and then the name of whatever animation that you want to use. So those names are right here. So when you go through the documentation and you pick out one that you want to use, like we can play around. We're going to use, I already have one picked out, but we can play around and pick one first. So say I pick this flip in X one right here. I can copy the class name. And so I'll say animate, and it actually puts in the double underscore for us. So you can say animate, flip in X, and then we can also provide a animate out value. And so let's come and let's pick out another one. So rotate, this is an exit. So rotate down left. So pick that one out, paste that in, and then there's a few other properties. I'm going to say animate once and set that to false. Hit save. And the reason why I'm bringing this in is because I'm going to mention a few things that when I've used this library before that you kind of have to watch out for. And so I'll return back and talk about this in a moment. So now let's go back to our code, hit refresh, and look at that. We have it. We have some animations. So we still have to add some styles and some layout elements. But as you can see, we have that shaking. And then as we exit, we have the element kind of being thrown away. So like I said, this is not the last version of what we're looking to do. It's simply a way to kind of test it out and to show you a bunch of the different options that are out there. So I already picked out a few options that I personally liked for this version, or for what we're going to be using. So let me go to my notes and find those. So the very first one is going to be animate, and then double under, and then back in right. And that's for the animate in. And then for animate out, I'm going to say back out, and it's actually back out right. Yes, that's correct. So back in right, and then back out right, which makes sense. We're kind of sliding it in, and then we want it to leave the same way. So now if we come and hit refresh, there we go. Now we're getting the type of behavior we're looking for. So at the very top, you'll see here, it comes in from off the screen and then slides and zooms in. That's perfect. That looks really good. So this, as you can see, with literally just about 3 lines of code, we were able to integrate an entire animation library with a lot of customization where you can add in any of your own entrances, your exits, and anything like that. So that part of it's done. Now, one thing I want to add in is through the years as I've worked with libraries like this one thing you have to be careful for is when you are working on a mobile device. So some of the mobile browsers like Safari and Chrome and some of those, they render CSS styles, animations, and those kinds of things differently than on a laptop. And so it's just something to kind of keep in mind, because specifically what I've seen when using this specific animation is when this was on mobile, I actually had to add in some other properties. So I would have a hook that said something like, is mobile. I'll create a kind of a fake mocked variable here. So say is mobile, set it to true. And usually it'd be pulling from the actual device and seeing if it's a mobile device or not. And then if this is true, then I'll say initially visible. So I'll say is mobile, then we'll set that to true. If not, I'll set it to false. And so what this will do, initially visible simply puts out the element and it, kind of bypasses the entire animation. And so it essentially doesn't wait for the scroll is the way I should put it. So it's going to slide in and it's going to run no matter what, because on a mobile device, the kind of the motion that you get with your thumb as you're scrolling can work with these libraries and have a slightly different effect on them. So that's nothing we have to do for this particular project, but if
It's
you're trying
true.
to
If
integrate
not, it's
this type
false.
of animation, then you want to just kind of keep that in mind. So I'm going to remove that. So now that we have our animation, what we're going to do now is integrate the ability to programmatically navigate between these components. So instead of having to use my mouse and scroll down or use the scroll bar on the right-hand side, I want to be able to simply click a button and then have it smoothly slide down. And so for that, we're going to be using the React Scroll library. It's a very helpful library, and it has some components in it. Some of them you have to kind of watch out for. So if you are using a application that has React Scroll and it has React Router, you may notice that they both have a component called link. And so if you ever have to have a page that has both of these components on them, then you have to perform something, you have to do an override. So I could say import link from React router DOM, just like this. And as you can see, that gives an error. And so what I can do is I can alias this. So I can say link as scroll link. And now I can call scroll link, and then I can call my regular link, and they don't conflict. And so that's how you can alias different modules. We won't have to do it here because we're not using both of those, but that is something that comes in very handy in especially larger, more complex applications. So we have in React Scroll, we have this element component and the link component. So what the element does is that gives us the ability to define certain parts of a page and allows us to scroll programmatically to that part of the page. So for me, thinking about this visually is usually the easiest way of doing it. So if I'm right here on the page and I want to click a button and scroll down, how does the application know how far to scroll? We don't want to hard code a value in, because if someone accesses this page from a very small screen, then if we hard code a value in, then it may go way past where we want to, or it's just going to be inaccurate. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to use this element tag, and then we're going to define a value each time that it's called. And then when we want to scroll to one of those pages, all we have to do is line it up and call that specific value. And don't worry if that's confusing. If you've never done it before, it's actually what it's very similar to is in regular HTML, it's very similar to using anchor links. And so in a standard HTML application, so like I can create just a HTML file right here. So let me just create index.html, and then I'll just create an HTML file here. And then inside of the body, I could have all kinds of content, but say that I have something very specific that I want to send people to. What I can do is in a div or a paragraph tag or something like that, I can provide an ID, and I could say, you know, my content, something like that. And then all I have to do for users is they can go to, you know, mysite.com, and then, you know, whatever page it is, like about us, and then they can do a hash and my content. And then what this is going to do, because this little hash is there in the URL string, it's going to look for an ID in that on that page, and if it finds it, it's going to scroll down to it. So what we're talking about doing is something that is inherently built into regular vanilla HTML. What the key difference is because React doesn't actually utilize, or the components that you're generating, they're not generating these divs right away. Or when you call a div, you're not actually creating a real div, you're creating a function that React is going to use to generate a div. And so working with this regular ID process, the way you would with regular HTML, isn't always going to work properly. So that's where libraries like React Scroll comes in, where we can perform the same type of task, where we can set up a element on the page that has an ID, and then we can programmatically navigate to it. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to take this iterator right here, and we're going to add one more level up. So I'm going to, above the num here, or I should say below the num and above the animate scroll, I'm going to call the element, and then the element takes in a few components. So first it takes in a name, and then it takes in a key, and then it also is going to take in some styles. So for the name, I'm just going to pass in num, but our numbers are integers, and so this has to be a string. So I'm going to say num to string, and then the key is just going to be number. And then I'm also going to provide some styles. So for the styles, I'm going to say it's going to be the height. And then let's go with a calculated value of 100 view height minus 150 pixels. And then I'm going to add a padding top of 150 pixels. And the reason for this is because our header is 150 pixels tall. So we simply want to take up the entire page minus the header height. So that is our element. We can get rid of this key here for the div. And now below animation scroll, we can close off that element tag, hit save. And now this should give us something very similar to what we had before, with the key difference being now we have something we can kind of latch on to on the page. And then we also are going to have the updated styles. So let's switch back. And this Yep, there we go. So notice before the element was kind of up here at the top. Now this is lined up perfectly in the center, right where we're wanting it. And as I scroll down, each one of these elements is popping up perfectly. So that is exactly what we're wanting. And as I scroll up, it does the same exact thing. So that's perfect. That's giving us the exact look and feel that we're looking for. So now all that's left is we simply have to programmatically enable the user to move between these components. So let's build that out now. So if we go inside of this content block here, I'm going to add another div group right above it. And so this is going to give us the ability to have a spot where we can put all of those buttons. And so if you were to open up the CSS file, you'll see that I already added in some of these items. So we have blocks, we have the block, and then we have these actions. And so that's what we're going to be adding in are these actions and items. So you don't have to write any of this CSS code. It's already there for you, but this is the structure that we're going to be following. So I'm going to move that over here just so I can reference it as I'm writing the code. So we have a content block, and then we have our actions. So I can pretty much copy this, and then inside of this block, just extend it and say that I have double underscore actions. And then inside of here, this is where we're going to have those link tags. Now, I'm going to first just add the link tags, and then we're going to come back after we test that out to make sure it's working. And then we'll add in that dynamic behavior where we do things like hide one of the link tags if we're on the very first or the very last one. So here we have our link tag, and we'll close this off, and then I'll put in the button, and this is a BS fill. Let's see. This is React icon. So let me just pull in from my notes the icons that we're wanting, and then we'll import them. So the very top one is going to be this BS fill arrow up square, and then we're going to do the same thing for the one right below it, except this one is going to say down. And then I'll just import these. If you have the auto importer library installed, then it may or may not bring. Sometimes when it knows about the libraries, it will let you automatically do it, but here it doesn't. So we can just auto import it ourselves. So import the BS fill, and that's from React icons /BS. And then we'll bring in this other one. So now we have our icons. And so now we simply have to add some props to the link tag. So very first one is going to be a style tag. And I'm going to say that our cursor is going to be of type pointer. And that's so that when we hover over it, it's going to use the kind of standard cursor that you'd expect to use. Now, the next thing we're going to add is a class name. And the class name is going to be very similar to what GitHub is recommending, but not exactly. As you can see, I use the -- item here. So actions -- item, just like that for the class name. And then just like React Router link, the link from React Scroll also has a to prop. Now, where the difference is with React Router, you are putting to and then a link to a route. Here, what we're doing when you do to, we're going to put the actual value that we're wanting to navigate to. So we have access to the number value, but we don't actually want that number value. What we want is, and sometimes React or the little autocomplete thing likes to get a little bit too rambunctious. So we don't actually want the number because that's the value of what we have right here. So instead, we want to have the number, and then in the case of the top one, we want to have the number minus 1. And so what this 2 does is, if you remember when we created the element, we passed in the name, and that's the number cast to a string. That is the ID, that's the wrapper for that element. And then this is exactly how that component knows what its value is. And then when we say 2, what this is giving us the ability to do is to look throughout that entire page, find something with that value. So say it's the second element, it's going to find whatever that number value is, it's going to subtract 1 from it because we want to navigate to the item above it. And then it's going to cast that to a string so that the types match up. And so that is our 2 value. As you may have guessed, when we want to slide down and move down, it's going to be number plus 1 instead of minus 1. So that is the 2. And then we have a few other props here that you would see if you went through the documentation of the link prop. So this is going to be the offset. And I already wrote out for you some of these hard-coded constant values like the offset and then the speed. So duration is going to be scroll speed. And then we're going to use a Boolean variable of or value for spy. And what that does is it kind of looks forward and it knows where the elements are on the page and gives some additional visibility to it. And then lastly is smooth, which is the type of animation that we're wanting. So I'm going to copy all of this for the bottom, and we only have to make 1 change. And so on this change, instead of saying that we want to navigate to a subtracted 1, we want to add 1 here. And this should give us what we are looking for, unless I'm missing something. So let's hit save and let's see what is on the page. There we go. So now if I click down, look at that. It is all working perfectly. So we're going up and down based on programmatically deciding where we want to navigate the user to. And notice it has that smooth scrolling integration and that animation. And so you've been able here to combine multiple libraries that technically don't have anything to do with each other to create one single feature that is, I think, very cool. And this is something that I've heard when I've integrated this into a project, people really liked it. So hopefully they like it when you do it as well. So we have time to kind of add a few polish items here. And one of the big ones is, it is, I think, confusing to show a up icon here when you're at the top. So if I click this, nothing happens because I'm already at the very top. So what I'd like to do is in this link, I would like to add some dynamic behavior. So I'm going to use a ternary operator. And so in this case, GitHub is kind of right. So when I say the number, which is also the index, as long as it's not equal to 0, then I want to show this value. Now the difference is I want to also add a fallback. So I'm going to show a link or I'm going to show an empty div. And the reason for that is because I want to have an empty div so that the items themselves don't kind of like bounce up and down based on which one is being used. So if the number is not equal to 0, in other words, if it's not the first one, then I want to show this link. If not, then I want to show a div that has this class. And this is something that is completely optional. It's just the way I would personally do it. And the reason for that is, imagine if you want to have like items looking like the scroller itself or the pagination isn't moving and you want to keep them in place, if you don't have this item, this empty div here, then when you go up or down from the first one to the second one, the buttons will actually bounce around. And that's not an ideal scenario. So that's a reason why I'm doing it. Now, give us a little more room, and we're going to do something very similar here at the bottom for that link to show going down below, except here what we're going to say is we have our nums, which is our array. And so here I'm going to say if the num is not equal to nums length minus 1, then I want to show this, or I want to show this, which is pretty much exactly what we did before, just kind of we're looking for the total value instead of the first value. So here we'll put that in, and then I'm going to copy the exact same empty div, place that here, and now let's hit save and make sure that that is all working. There we go. So now you can see we don't have the up arrow here, so it's not confusing. And if I scroll to the next one, now we do have both of those. And then if I scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see we don't have that down arrow. It's not just hidden because of how we're doing this. So like if I'm clicking that where this is, it's not like the button is hidden. As far as React is concerned, that button doesn't even exist. So because when the component got generated, we checked to see what the value was here. Because it didn't match up, it put in that empty div. So it's not a hidden link. It actually is a link that doesn't even exist because React didn't need it, so it didn't generate it. And so as you can see, each one of these is working very nicely. If I scroll all the way up using home, then I can, you can see the very first one's working as well. So that is our entire feature. That is using React Scroll, that's using Animate CSS to be able to create a kind of a merged animation feature that you can use, and something that I've personally done in times in the past where I needed a feature like this, and say it was for an application where this type of behavior was going to be used quite a bit, I would actually create a shared component like this, and then anytime that I needed that behavior on a page, I didn't have to rewrite all of this code. I would simply create a shared component, pass in the different data, and then that component would know how to do all of this. And so it wouldn't care what content was there. It would simply render that, that list of, it could be blogs or page content or videos or anything like that. And then you'd still get all of that cool animation behavior without having to rewrite this every single time. So does anybody have any questions about any of what we built out today? And if you do have questions, put them in the chat. I will open that up and give you a few minutes to type that out with any questions you have about this. Oh, thank you so much. I'm glad that you are enjoying it and finding it helpful. Yeah, I definitely recommend for anyone watching this that likes to add little polishes and animations to your application, definitely go through all of these, because as you'll see, some of these are pretty intense, like some of them are very jarring where there's very few situations where you'd want to have that animation. But then there are some other ones that you may want to use on a very regular basis, like, just a very light fade in like this. In certain applications, I've actually built out a dedicated div component where pretty much every major component, every highlighted component needed to have that behavior. And instead of me having to call the animation behavior every single time, I could create a shared component that would do it. And just while other people are typing in any questions or anything like that, I'll actually show you how to do something like that in just a short minute. So say that I want to do that, I can create a div here, and let's call it a fade div. So faded or fade in div, just like this. And then it's going to take some props that's going to be just React children. And then we'll just say that those are children of type React, React node, just like that. And then what I can do is take in this animation on scroll library, just like this, place it inside, and then pass in children, just like this. And now what I can do is let's pick out what that animation was. So just fade in, just like that. So I'll paste that in, and for fade out, I'm pretty sure it's just fade out. Yes, it is. So we can just type that in, and this may or may not require like having a wrapper div. I'm not sure. It's been a while since I've done something like this. And then I can say return, and we're just going to return this whole value.
Above my pay grade.
Just like this. And now if there's any part of the component, so say I want to put something above all of these other ones. So now this can be our, like our special little fade in div like this. And let me pull in some fake content. So pull in a paragraph here. And now if I hit save, we have this fade in div. And so if we go back and scroll all the way up to the top, let's see, where are we at? Oh yeah, this is probably getting at the very, very top of it. Let me hide our other ones just so they're not in the way. And see where that's at. Return, fade in div. So, oh, I know where it's at. It's because I'm not adding the padding on the left-hand side. So that's what it is. So let's actually pull out the image really quick. There we go. It was hidden by the image. And now it'll be up there. There we go. So you can see it's right up here. And we can now just put a little div above it or some style. So style, margin, top, and 200 pixels. There we go. Okay, so you can see in just a few minutes, you hit refresh, automatically you have that fade in behavior. And so now when you have an application that needs that in a bunch of different spots, instead of just calling a regular div and then having to add all of that manually, now you can just call in that fade in div component, put in all of your content, and then you immediately get that type of behavior without any type of work. Essentially the same as if you just called a regular div. And if you wanted to get really fancy, you could even put in other custom properties, or something where you could change the timing of it or anything like that. But that's just an example of how you could make this type of feature very reusable. So there's another question in there. So do I download the animate .css extension in VS Code? You can if you want. I didn't. It's totally up to you on what you feel like you need. It auto completed for me without me having to do anything like that, but you can definitely play around with it and see if it's something that that you'd find helpful. And for the version of React, I'm using the same version as everyone here should be using because it's the version from the template generator. So the version of React that we're using here is 16.13.1. And if you reference the code, let me actually put that in the notes or put that in the chat. So if you reference this repo, then you'll see all of the exact versions. So the versions of everything in that package JSON file, like the React animation on scroll. These are all the latest versions of those libraries. So you don't have to revert back or do anything like that to work with React 16. Sounds good. So if there are no other questions, I want to thank everybody for your time. Good luck this next month, and I will be picking out and building a fun project for us in May. So have fun, and I will talk with you then.